Welcome to the Aerospace Advantage podcast, brought to you by PenFed. I'm your host, Heather Penney. Here on the Aerospace Advantage, we speak with leaders in the DoD, industry, and other subject matter experts to explore the intersection of strategy, operational concepts, technology, and policy when it comes to air and space power. It's so hard to believe, but 2025 is in the rear-view mirror. And to say the least, it's been a year. I did not see South American Venezuela on my bingo card for 25, but here we are. As we always do for the first episode of each month, it's time for the Rendezvous, our monthly look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. when it comes to air and space power, plus important national security trends we should be watching around the globe. We're recording this crazy early for this Rendezvous because it's Tuesday, December 16th. Given the holiday break, that's how the schedule played out. So if world events have happened since then, we'll catch that on the next episode or provide a special. So with that, let's welcome the regular gang. Laser Lazarski. Laser, great to have you.
Great to be back, and an early happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you. And Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, sir.
Happy Air Power Holidays.
Gonzo.
And Happy New Year.
Kyle Puma Pomeroy from our space team.
Yeah, great to be here. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
And for all you dummies, we got J-Dam on board. Mike Dum.
Happy, well, not quite Chinese New Year.
Yeah, it's going to be a little while, right? So it's going to be a year of the fire horse, right?
Are we already back around to the fire horse?
And so we also have Doug Birkey, our executive director of the Mitchell team. Everyone, welcome. Doug?
Who has failed to have a good background, but that's okay.
We'll get to that later. All right, so Laser, let's start with you as usual. Let's begin with a congressional update. Where do the defense bills stand, and what should we be tracking? Because I know the NDAA is about wrapped up, so what are the main provisions that we should all be tracking? And give us an update on defense probes.
Yeah, so by the time this podcast airs, the Senate should have passed the FY26 NDAA, and the president should have signed it into the law. And as you said, they're working it right now. There's an issue, and I know that whoever's been watching, there's an issue that popped up about our rotary wing aircraft conducting training operations in high traffic areas. So, and that language is in the final bill of the NDAA. Senator Cruz, Senator Cantwell oppose it, and Senate Majority Leader Thune is working to resolve it, but it's not going to be done in the NDAA because it's already passed in the House. They just want to get it passed in the Senate. Senator Thune said he'll go work that with the next bill that gets passed, and it could be an appropriations bill that we do January next year, and we think that's got it resolved. But bottom line, it's not going to tank the NDAA. So the House passed the NDAA on the 10th last week. Senate is supposed to pass it tomorrow, which is the 17th. And then, like I said, President will have it signed before the 31st, which is important because we have all the authorizations that expire at the end of the year. The top line's 901. That's about $8 billion above the president's budget, which is great. Wasn't as high as the Senate was trying to get, but that's what was negotiated. And the good thing about that is that number was not just negotiated on the authorizers, but the appropriators were involved, leadership was involved, the White House was involved. So while I don't know what the final defense appropriations top line is going to be, I expect it probably will be around $8 billion above the president's budget. And then this bill, it's 3,000 pages long because we also include the State Department, Intel, and Coast Guard authorizations in the bill. So it's a monster bill, but it is a good bill. And we talked a lot about it, but there is a lot of great language for Air Force on aircraft, be it A-10s, B-21s, F-47s. Overall, good bill, good authorization, and I think they did a good job with increasing the budget. Looking at the approach side, there's the Senate. Well, the bottom line is they're still trying to work approach bills. We won't get them done till January of next year. But the Senate's trying to work a 5-bill minibus just to get it passed over on the House side. But there's no consent on how they move that forward. The House appropriators were trying to do a smaller package, and I think they're going to run out of time. So ultimately, what they're looking at is trying to get these last 9 bills, trying to get them passed out in January. The one thing that we need to watch is the main issue that they're working is healthcare subsidy extension, increase, some changes, guidelines. Obviously, that's not defense related, but that labor healthcare bill is tied to the defense bill when we finally do get it passed. So I'm going to be optimistic, and Sledge isn't here, but I'll be optimistic that we don't shut down, but we could. I mean, there is a possibility that we could shut down next year if we cannot come to an agreement. I say we, Congress can't come to an agreement between Republican, Democrats, House and Senate on what's going to happen with these healthcare subsidies, because that bill's going to get tied to defense. But if everything works out, they're hoping to get, another 9, maybe 10 bills pass, ultimately have only probably Homeland Security and then maybe state and foreign ops are not going to be able to get on a bill. So there'll be a year-long CR. I do not think defense will be on a year-long CR, but we'll just keep our fingers crossed. The only other thing, there's a reconciliation bill that we've seen out there. Tranche 2 and 3 are supposed to be coming out soon. And we're hearing Tranche 3 is going to be tied to Golden Dome and Golden Dome associated efforts. And then the other last thing that's going to happen just for everybody, and it's important to us in defense, is there's an en bloc package of 97 nominees, and in there are 20 Pentagon nominees, plus an additional 2 nominees that are going to get 2, maybe 4 nominees that will get individual votes. One of them's a NASA administrator, but those should be done also tomorrow night, either before or after the NDAA is complete. And that'll just leave a handful of national security nominees left on the executive calendar, and typically they'll get kicked back and have to get renominated. So getting these 97 through is great. And then for everybody that's listening, since it's going to be playing later, Congress comes back, Senate is back in session on the 5th of January, and on the 6th of January, House is back. And the big date we're looking at is 30 January when this continuing resolution ends.
Stay buckled up, because I bet it's still going to be a rough ride coming January 30th. So, Joan Deptula and Gonzo, the administration issued a new national security strategy. It's raised some eyebrows. Thoughts on the new NSS and what you might expect out of the NDS as a result, the National Defense Strategy?
Yeah, well, obviously, Heather, it's a question that everybody and their brother has an opinion about. And whenever a new national security strategy comes out, the first thing to understand is what problem is it trying to solve? And in this case, the administration is clearly reacting to a world that no longer behaves the way earlier U.S. strategies assumed it would. So let's take a look backwards for a minute here. For roughly 3 decades, American national security strategy was built around global engagement. Alliances, institutions, trade, and the idea that U.S. leadership could shape a more peaceful and stable international order. Now, that approach delivered real benefits, but it also rested on assumptions that have been modified since it was first put in place. It assumed that adversaries would eventually converge toward cooperation, that economic integration would moderate behavior, and that U.S. commitments could remain open-ended without consequences. The new strategy starts from a much harder-edged premise, that the world is competitive, coercive, and transactional, that power matters more than norms, leverage more than consensus, and sovereignty more than institutions. In a sense, it's a corrective. It's clear-eyed about great power competition, even though they don't like using that term anymore, tougher on free riding by allies, skeptical of endless military commitments, and much more willing to use economic tools, such as trade, sanctions, supply chains, as instruments of national security. Now, those are some valid strengths and, frankly, overdue in some areas. But where it raises eyebrows is in the risks that it introduces. The strategy leans heavily on conditionality, on the idea that U.S. commitments depend on reciprocal behavior. That can drive burden sharing, but it can also blur credibility. Deterrence works not just because the U.S. has power, but because allies and adversaries believe that the U.S. will use it even when it's costly. If commitments look negotiable, however, allies hedge and adversaries will test. We see that going on with Russia testing us in NATO almost every day. There's also a trade-off between short-term leverage and long-term influence. Transactional approaches can extract concessions quickly, but alliances, institutions, and credibility are forms of strategic capital that compound over time. If they erode, competitors don't need to defeat the U.S., they just need to wait. So my bottom line is this. The new strategy is approaching the problem a bit differently than the United States has in the past. Engagement without reciprocity failed in key places. Power competition is real and strength matters. The question is execution and balance. If leverage comes at the expense of trust and predictability, the strategy could weaken the very system that has amplified American power for decades. Now, on the other hand, if it blends realism with durable alliances and credibility, it could recalibrate U.S. leadership rather than diminish it. But the fact of the matter is, time will tell.
That's excellent. I mean, those alliances and that kind of credibility, I think, is going to be hugely important because the world that we built post-World War II, that global order we paid for in blood. And we can't easily reconstruct that. And so I think we have to be conscientious and not take that for granted. Gonzo, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, those are some great points, and I'll add a few. You're right, everyone has an opinion on this document,
Yeah.
but I think a nonpartisan assessment of it will reveal that it has much in common with previous national security strategies. For instance, the strategy's foundational principles include halting regional conflicts before they spiral into global wars, maintaining a strong U.S. national defense establishment, and that is the best deterrent. And it says very clearly that we must work with our allies to maintain regional balances of power and counter aspiring hegemons. I don't think we can disagree with any of those. Now, I would also challenge claims that this strategy's regional priorities are vastly different than the last administration's strategy. In order, they are the Western Hemisphere, Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. The defense of the U.S. homeland has always been the top priority of our national security strategy. And the 2025 strategy is very clear on the growing threat to our homeland. And that clarity is needed because there are still some who believe that America is protected by its geography. One member of Congress recently posted online just a few days ago from this taping that America has two massive oceans to the east and to the west that are natural protective barriers from the old world, and it's a barrier that can help keep us safe if we let it. In an era of long-range ballistic missiles, cruise missiles...
Was that a quote from 1938?
That's actually how I respond to that quote from 3 days ago. Hypersonic weapons, cyber threats, transnational terror groups, that's, as you said, it's simply not true. So declaring homeland and hemispheric security as the top priority of the strategy is absolutely appropriate. Now, for the Indo-Pacific, the strategy says that building alliances and partnerships must remain the foundation of the regional security and prosperity. It also calls for building a military capable of denying aggression anywhere in the first island chain, including against Taiwan. And that also mirrors the previous NSS. But I find it interesting that the strategy says we must build a military to deny aggression in the Indo-Pacific. The use of that word is really interesting, and I think it's intentional. But hopefully it will lead to increasing the size of our air and naval forces, since they're going to provide preponderance of combat power for an Indo-Pacific conflict. And that's going to bring me to my last point, which is that's going to call for a larger national security budget. And that's the ultimate test for any national security strategy. Will an administration back it up with resources to achieve its objectives? Our annual defense budgets average less than 3% of U.S. GDP compared to the 6.4% on average we spent from 1961 to 1991 to deter the Soviet Union. Anything less than 5% of GDP will not rebuild our military, it will not pace China, and it will not achieve the strategy's objectives.
You know, it's interesting, Gonzo, you said defense of the homeland and, you know, the hemispheric security. I would actually say defense of the homeland has long been really just kind of lip service because we haven't really truly invested in that. And hemispheric security has not been our priority. That's been the lesser included case of our ability to project power. And so one of my concerns is, are we shrinking our vision? Are we coming back to a neo-Monroe doctrine where we're no longer truly projecting power, where we're really beginning to look at just what's in our backyard?
Or are we putting some weight behind our rhetoric?
It's going to take the resources.
Bingo.
It's going to take those alliances. It's going to take those relationships. So, J-Dam, given your China expertise, what's your take on this? How are the Chinese reading this? And how should we maybe be thinking about some of these nuances?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to disagree with Gonzo and the boss, but come on. I mean, there is so much about this national security strategy and the direction that the administration is going.
Well, you had brought up some really good points.
It strikes me, you know, a couple of things. First of all, to Gonzo's point about increasing air and maritime power in the Pacific, read the national security strategy carefully. Air power is not mentioned at all. Naval power is mentioned. Maritime power is mentioned, especially as it relates to, you know, to the situation in Taiwan and the South China Sea.
Very good point.
We want access to ports, and we want to interlink maritime security issues. I'm reading right from the document here in front of me. We will require further investment in our military, especially naval capabilities. So air power is kind of left out of the discussion. The only saving grace is that the Army is not specifically called out in the national security strategy either. But the Navy seems to be the clear winner.
I think it's just they're just assuming air power across the
they're just of course, air power is always assumed, and that's.
But when it's assumed, it's not resource. That's the problem.
Bingo.
Well, in all seriousness, there's a lesson here that you bring up for the Air Force leadership. They have got to start articulating the needs for increased resources to stop the nosedive that the Department of the Air Force has been in.
Yeah, I mean, it fundamentally, I think there is a lesson learned here, and we'll see what happens in the National Defense Strategy, which I expect will be released before this podcast goes to air. We'll have to see. But my other point to some of the things Heather was just saying was, Homeland Defense has always been foundational to the national security strategy. But during my time in uniform, starting over 30 years ago, the idea was fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here. The whole global war on terrorism was we don't want terrorists to target the United States, and we put a whole lot of blood and treasure into taking the fight to terrorism abroad so that we would not have to address those issues here in the United States. This sea change, and I think it's very short-sighted, this idea that, the forest may be on fire and the forest is all around our home, but as long as our little property's good, we don't have to worry about what's going on, anywhere else in the world, and maybe we'll rely on allies and partners to take care of that abroad. To answer your question, Heather, directly, I think China is seeing this as a win. I think it is clearly a win. I'm very concerned about what might come out in the National Defense Strategy. I referenced Secretary Hegseth's remarks at the Reagan Defense Forum recently, where he says, we are going to respect the historic military buildup that China is undertaking. I'm not entirely sure what he meant by respecting their military buildup, but it does sound like, despite some of the rhetoric in the national security strategy about opposing any kind of change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, we are acknowledging China's rise as a great power and acknowledging that they've got this historic military buildup that, if you read between the lines, some of the other comments about losing every war game that he has made and other things, that China sees it has come into its own, and I think it's going to be emboldened to take more action. The other thing that I'd point out, and this goes to the conversations that Heather and Doug and I were having before, was I think the name of the game going forward, when you start talking about great power competition, it is not about a small island in the Western Pacific. It is not about the South China Sea. Great power competition going forward is going to be about global resource competition. And right now, the only thing that's keeping the People's Liberation Army from focusing on expeditionary capabilities is its focus on Taiwan. And so in terms of buy-in time, so we can build up our Air Force, so we can build up our Navy, so we can build up our military to deal with an expeditionary People's Liberation Army, we need them to be focused on security in East Asia for as long as humanly possible. So again, there's a lot of problems with the coherence of the national security strategy, but to the extent it talks about holding the line along the first island chain, not allowing a change in the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, I think we have to keep the fight over there and keep the deterrence and forward posture over there in order to keep China focused on East Asia and not allowing them to turn their gaze farther afield, because that will really jeopardize U.S. national security.
I think you're straight on point there. I mean, it's very salient that we want to keep China and the PLA focused on Taiwan so they're not doing those kinds of expeditionary operations. And I think we also need to be conscientious that we don't become so focused near shore, just like we want to keep them focused near shore. Now, it's another thing, though, in terms of looking at the Western Hemisphere, because we've seen China really engage in infrastructure projects financially with a lot of their companies, with their military civil fusion. We are seeing them do, I think, a soft invasion of South America as well as Africa and a lot of other areas. So it might be relevant to re-elevate the Western Hemisphere in terms of security because of that gray zone type of operations that China is engaging in. But at the same time, we don't want to become so focused.
Yeah, but let me challenge you on that, because first of all, I think you're absolutely right. 100%. Yes. And China has been very successful at pursuing an economic strategy in South America. And so this gets to the age-old question of like, look, the U.S. military is awesome and it can do a lot of great things, and it can certainly buy you time. But I don't know that a military strategy and a military engagement strategy is a strong counterweight to an economic, that kind of soft power invasion that you were talking about. I think you meet military force with military force. You can use the military to secure, time and space to seek other solutions. But right now, China's just coming in with cheaper telecommunications networks, better investment, more investment to frankly buy off votes in the United Nations in some of these small Caribbean countries.
Which we certainly should be.
And the question really is, can the military balance that type of economic investment and our interests in South America?
Well, remember, this is a national security strategy, so that should encompass all of the instruments of power, national power that we have. And we haven't seen the NDS come out. But I think what you bring up is a really good point, that if we want to keep China contained by keeping their focus on Taiwan, we need to ensure that our interests and security activities are not contained by focusing on the Gulf. We need to maintain that global vision and global presence. We paid for that order in blood after World War II. And so I think it'll be very interesting. We have yet to see what the NDS has to say. So Gonzo, Stratcom has a new boss, and we'd like your thoughts on what he's going to face, because with the triad in the middle of the generational reset and our adversaries pressing hard on nukes, China's doing a nuke breakout, it's a really pivotal area.
Yeah, and it is a pivotal time, and Admiral Crowell's a great pick to lead Stratcom through it. Now, as most of our audience probably knows, he has an operational background as a submariner. By the way, a friend of mine.
Submariner, not submariner.
Not submariner. That's exactly right. Careful how you pronounce it, because a submariner implies that one is below a mariner. And so I like Crowell's statement that deterrence must encompass all elements of national power, all of our military's capabilities, including our space forces, not just the nuclear triad. And his take on the need to deter in a tech-saturated operational environment includes AI and other information technologies. That's spot on. But that said, Crowell must continue to fight for the resources needed to rebuild every element of our nuclear deterrent, including nuclear command and control and communications infrastructure. And that's not going to be an easy task, given competing demands to rebuild our military. And simply recapitalizing our current triad, well, that's not going to address the growth in the nuclear threat for our nation. There is also a pressing need to grow our triad's capacity because it's now sized to deter a relatively benign Russia of the 1990s, not a revisionist Russia that rattles the nuclear saber, and a China which is in the midst of unprecedented nuclear weapons buildup. Our triad must be sized and shaped to deter two nuclear peer adversaries as called for by multiple national commissions. So Admiral Carrell should be the leading advocate for building a more robust triad. And I'll end by saying the most cost-effective way of building that triad would be to field a larger force of dual-capable bombers, because that's going to enhance both nuclear and conventional deterrence. It would increase our capacity to conduct bomber task force operations day to day to assure our allies and show our adversaries that we have the will and capacity to respond globally within hours to deter any threat of aggression.
And it's crucial that Congress remain fully committed to the Sentinel program.
Absolutely.
All of the above, right? I mean, we need to have every single leg of the triad. And I've been thinking this for a while, but we need to have a standalone nuclear deterrence budget to commit to these recapitalization projects, because we can't have them detract from the conventional recapitalization priorities of the services.
I would absolutely agree with that. It's about time we do that, much as the Navy nuclear.
Just to remind you all, it's been a recommendation of ours for well over a year now.
Yeah.
We keep on bringing it up and nobody pays attention.
Well, hopefully it'll
Because
start
what
getting
it
this
does is
traction.
it gores the other services' oxes, one in particular, the Army.
Well, you know, the way the PLA has funded its incredible breakout from the nuclear to the rocket force to their air forces to their Navy has been that they have shrunk their Army because they don't view the Army, their ground forces, nearly as relevant as their other capabilities, their other services.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are some things the Chinese do that are pretty smart.
Manage your money on your time with 24/7 digital banking on the PenFed mobile app. Easily make payments, transfer funds, and deposit checks through mobile deposit.
That's music to my ears.
Learn more at penfed.org. Federally insured by NCOA.
All right, well, keeping the conversation rolling, Doug, let's bring you in because Northrop Grumman just revealed their new CCA design. So we had Lockheed with Victus, now we've got Northrop Grumman, and Boeing just recently netted a major accomplishment with a live weapons fire test with their Ghost Bat down in Australia. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on these developments and where the CCA program stands writ large.
No, you're totally right. Yeah, Northrop's project they just announced, it's called Project Talon. And what they emphasized was rapid construction versus some earlier designs they've been playing with. It's 1,000 pounds lighter, 50% fewer parts. They built it 30% faster than an earlier derivative. And this is something that was, I think, made possible given their acquisition and internalization of Scale Composites. As you guys know, that was Fort Rutan's shop out of Mojave, really, really big with futuristic, fast-moving designs. And so bringing that on board allowed them, I think, to really think about out-of-the-box ways to approach the problem. And we all know we need mass fast, so it was an interesting approach. They said it took them 15 months from the time they came up with the concept to actually get this thing standing on its own gear in the factory, and 9 more months to fly. So they're saying Bulb 26. Which if they pull that off, that's pretty impressive. We haven't done something like that as a country in quite some time. They're pretty clear this is not for Increment 2 thus far, at least how they're seeing it. Obviously, people have said Increment 2 is a little soft on what the Air Force wants right now, and people are waiting for clarification on that. So we'll see where it plays. I think one of the biggest takeaways I look at with this is that right now, as a nation, we've got Kratos, General Atomics, Anduril, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman all involved in designing, innovating, and producing new combat aircraft. We haven't seen that much energy in defense aerospace for
1950s,
years.
yeah. I mean,
And so what that means for design teams and everything else, and reinvigorating those skill sets is absolutely incredible and crucial for the country for what we need. The one thing I would really put on the table here for all these designs is to do what? Do you want this thing to operate in the long ranges of the Pacific? Under what kind of threat environments, doing air-to-air, air-to-ground, EW, you name it. And so the pictures of what Northrop just built looks really, really cool. But again, to do what? And that's going to be crucial to see where it falls in the space. And under what assumptions? Is this going to be able to function in a heavily conjugated environment where it's going to have to rely more on the AI versus directions from crewed assets, things like that. So a lot of questions still on the table, but impressive what they did. But like I said, I'm most excited by the energy we right now see in defense and aerospace and the people that's bringing to the table. It's so important.
Yeah, the design teams are really exciting. The fact that they're really investing in innovating new designs, going through those iterations. This has been done for decades. And I would actually say from an airframe perspective, really since the 1950s and 60s, when you're developing new airframes, you're developing jet engines. But the key for me is, in addition to the for what, which implies a mission, task, and a geography. So that's going to be instantiated in the physicality of the airframe design. But frankly, the autonomy.
And Lucky, it's also when, and that's where I have an issue, because you got a 2027 date that's magically out there. I mean, whether it is or not.
It's not so magically out there. It's like, what, we got a year to that, to the Davidson window?
Right. So where's mass? Doug, you were talking about mass, right? And I'm looking at a lot of these platforms, and we're looking at 29 or so. Where do we get mass? And I'll say, where's increment 0? The one that gets, they're not the perfect one. They don't do all the bells and whistles. But if we had to go in 27, what assets do we bring in to overwhelm the Chinese?
And frankly, is the autonomy going to be ready? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Heather and I were talking about this the other day. And if you look at World War II, almost 99.9% of all the designs that we fought and won the war with were already in production or right on the edge, right when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And so you fight with what you got. And that's where what we can't do is use future promises as a gap over current capability. And that's why you need to do it full. Because if you talk about with General Deptula or Gonzo or JDAM, we're talking about national security strategy. The answer is you got to do it all. You do not have a choice. You have to defend the homeland. You have to be in Europe. You have to be in the Pacific. And so capacity is going to be the key of that. So now, Philip.
And we can't wait to surge production. So production needs to go forward on everything right now, because I feel a lot of people don't realize that surprise time horizon. However long it takes you to get on contract, to buy the raw materials, then to produce, that's going to be how long it takes before you can actually field a meaningful capability, whether or not that's CCA, a fighter, a bomber. So if you want those numbers in any one of those mission areas, you need to start buying like yesterday, because if the time horizon for production and fielding is 5 years, and we know we're going to go to war in 2, then you're already 3 years too late.
Yeah, it's great to develop the best cutting-edge AI and other uninhabited aircraft technologies. But if they're not in the field, they don't deter, they don't fight, and they don't win.
Yeah. Okay, Doug, so we talked about the CCA in general, but we also had a really big deal. I mean, the Ghost Bat fired its first live weapon. Talk about that.
What was significant there is that what you saw was teaming between the MQ-28 Ghost Bat and Royal Australian Air Force F/A-18 Hornet, and then an E-7, and they all teamed to shoot down with an A-120 a target drone, and that was earlier in December. Why that's so significant is if you want to keep the cost down on the CCA, you need to do teaming with other higher end platforms, which oftentimes be crewed, to use their sensors, their processing capabilities, et cetera. Because if you put that on the uncrewed asset, guess what? You're not breaking the cost curve. Right. And so the fact that you can bring this all together real time into a successful shot was very, very challenging and significant. It also shows why aircraft like the E-7 are still hugely important, because to develop a weapons quality track, you can have zero latency. I mean, it's all about find, fix, track, target, and the power of that sensor, the lack of latency and all that is absolutely crucial. And it's also a question where if we want all these systems to work and we want the teaming to work, you cannot present the adversary with a singular problem set. You have to come at it from multiple directions. It's kind of to the point where if you have one thing, they can probably jam it. If you have many things coming in from different domains and all that, it's going to be very hard to deal with that. And so that's why we want as many options on the table to close out a kill chain, not just one that they can block. And so I think it's pretty impressive they did with that, that test successfully. It was a joint effort with Australia and the US. It's all goodness.
Yeah, and we need to keep up some of those joint efforts across our allies, especially in the CCA and autonomy space. So Puma, let's bring you into the conversation. We haven't really talked to you since the opener. Space Force announced a new SATCOM jammer, and we all know that space control is a huge imperative for the service. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Lucky, and speaking of the production discussion from just a moment ago, Space Force accepted its first production unit of Meadowlands electronic warfare system. This is a deployable ground-based SATCOM, satellite communication jammer, used to disrupt adversary C2 and comm networks, any kind of data links. And for those familiar with Space Force's CCS or counter communication system, this is the upgrade to that weapon system. So we haven't used the terms first gen, second gen, third gen in Space EW, but this is the next gen system for that mission area. This is a huge improvement and step forward for the Space Force. New tech advancements have allowed L3 Harris and the developers to drive down the size of the hardware, which means it becomes even more mobile compared to a CCS and something we would want in a China fight. It can be operated remotely, which opens up operational maneuverability. They've also updated software and layered in an open architecture software system so that we can adapt to adversary activities to change the software on the system. So many of the elements we've been talking about, dynamic space operations, apply here. And so we know that the Space Force has actually been looking at this and using that concept to update their weapon systems as they come online. So as a former counter communication system operator, I'm excited to see this. If I can give a back in my day, 15 years ago, although now it's almost 20, there was no software. There was no computer screen. We literally cabled everything together and punched buttons on the interface. So this system now that we're bringing online is easier to operate, easier to move, easier to adapt, more effective against the adversary. We're excited to see this, and we're excited that we're talking about this because this is a mission area that historically we haven't talked a lot about. And now we're coming out saying these weapon systems are being produced, they're being delivered, and we're talking about foreign material sales of this weapon system, which is pretty amazing to think about. We'll have a same baseline across our partners, which opens up interoperability, which opens up the ability to C2 multiple nations against this using that weapon system. So it's really neat to see just from a capability standpoint, but the changes we're seeing just almost administratively in terms of what we talk about and how we talk about it.
No, I think it's very exciting that you are talking about it because for too long, space has been in the black. People don't know the capabilities that you've had for decades, that you've been operating for decades. By talking about the Space Force capabilities, especially Meadowlands, I think this gives other warfighters ideas about how space integrates into the broader picture. So we're going to come back to you to talk about Space Force Association happening their annual conference. But before we do that, Laser, you just came back from the Reagan Defense Forum, and that made some pretty big news. What were your main takeaways?
Yeah, matter of fact, they discussed a lot of issues that we just finished discussing, to include some concerns that they had with the national security strategy. If any of the listeners ever has the opportunity to attend, or if you can go next year, which should be 4 or 5 December, I strongly encourage it. You've got Congress, staff, the Pentagon, and industry, press. I mean, it is a real great event. The theme for this year is restoring deterrence with peace through strength. And it opened up, there was a discussion, the Reagan, there was a November 2025 Reagan National Defense Survey that showed that Americans want the United States to lead globally. They want that to maintain a military strong enough to deter adversaries, and they want us to stand by adversaries who are on the front line. Mm-hmm. And the other discussions, and I think it's aligned with what was discussed today, was aligning the defense budget with global priorities. There's a novel idea. Revitalizing the industrial base, advancing artificial intelligence, restoring confidence in the U.S. military. And they really had a great talk on recruiting and retention. And the Marine Corps Commandant was on that panel, and he talked about how important it was to Marines to have their best people being recruiters. That's how they get the right people, something I don't think any of the other services do. They talked about NATO, the future of Ukraine, ensuring superiority in space, Golden Dome, missile defense, congested logistics, CENTCOM after Midnight Hammer, and then, as we were discussing, competition with China. The last panel I thought was outstanding. It had General Jack Keane, Secretary Liam Panetta, and former National Security Advisor Alex Wong, and they looked at national security issues around the globe. The bottom line is that they said we need to maintain a credible force with the ability to deter and respond to potential multi-theater conflicts, something we hadn't heard in a long time, not necessarily addressed. Industrial base, not just to exist, but to surge. And then you guys were talking about this earlier. It needs to provide forward presence with a force that is forward deployed, and then it must burden share with allies. So it really was a great event. I think they echoed a lot of the things that you guys have been talking about today.
No, thank you for that rundown. The burden sharing with allies. After World War II, we deliberately kept Europe weak and provided them that security umbrella because we didn't want them to start World War III. But I think that the times have changed, and the investments that we've made in those relationships and those alliance structures now have come to a maturity where we do need them to take some more of that burden. And I think the time is right.
But,
so,
and just jumping in on that one, and Congress agrees. At the same time, they don't want to see pulling out of NATO. I mean,
agreed.
They don't want to see. I mean, there's language in the NDAA that prevents DOD from doing what they were trying to do when they were pulling out of Romania and other places, that they cannot do that without, coming back to Congress and letting them know.
Yeah, I mean,
let me chime in on that too, Heather, that we just kind of throw this stuff out there. Well, we should reinvigorate the defense industrial base. Okay, everybody, thumbs up. Like, let's get on with that. We ask more of our allies, and I'm on board with that. Taiwan, for its part, is going through this huge sea change, raising their defense spending to something like 5% of GDP. Small problem with the non-diplomatically recognized island of Taiwan. They can only buy from the United States, maybe a few defense articles from the Europeans. But the problem fundamentally is, where are all these weapons going to come from? Everybody's going to increase their defense budgets, but we've talked on the podcast before about how the defense industrial base is kind of tapped out. The big defense contractors don't have excess production capability. And we saw that come out when Ukraine, we were expending all these weapons, or we were giving them all these weapons to expend, and we could not replace them fast enough. We shot all these AMRAAMs against Iran to defend Israel, and now we're struggling to replace them. So, okay, the allies are going to increase their defense spending, and many of them have. Where are these weapons coming from?
Well, that's a Last Supper problem, right? I mean, because in the 90s, we not only cut the services in half, the Air Force literally was chopped in half, but we also told industry, hey, we're going to starve a bunch of you, figure it out. And even after 9/11, when we started the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we did not meaningfully reinvest in the industrial base. And so they did what they did. They got small, they made their lines super efficient, and they scaled down. And the Defense Department has been a terrible partner to industry when it comes to providing them a stable and predictable demand signal. I mean, we saw that with the F-22. There are supposed to be 750 of them. It got prematurely terminated, 187. So I think, to answer your question, if the United States wants to reinvigorate the defense industrial base, it has to provide that long-term volume demand signal, and it can only do that through a multi-year procurement progress. Because multi-year procurements, they provide you quantity at more affordable rates. It gives a stable, predictable demand signal to industry, and it's also a CR-proof. So these are things that we need to do, but I'm really grateful you brought that up. Like, okay, we don't have the ability to surge. And why? Because we haven't given a good demand signal and have not been good partners to industry. All right, so Puma, follow-up from the Reagan Defense Forum, because Space Force Association just hosted their conference. And actually, most of the MI Space team was down there along with the AFA leadership team. What were your main observations?
Yeah, SFA's annual Space Power Conference took place last week. Huge event for Space Force, the Guardians, supporting industries. Lots of news coming out of that conference. I'll cover a couple of things. So we had Secretary Mink talking about the acquisition strategy for AMTI capabilities, airborne moving target indication. That'll be an NRO and Space Force partnership. So we know we're going in that direction of that partnership, and that the acquisition strategy is in development, but obviously it's going to take time. They got to put acquisition strategy before there's an acquisition, before there's a launch, before et cetera, et cetera. So we know AMTI from space is coming. We know it's hard, and we know it's going to take a while for it to be here. But we know the Secretary's talking about it, and it's going to be a priority for the Space Force. CSO recapped a great Space Force year and unveiled the terms of reference for space weapon systems, like how the Army names tanks, Abrams tanks, how the Air Force names planes, although then the Air Force usually uses different names than what they're officially named. But I won't go through all of them, but for orbital warfare systems, they're going to be using Norse Pantheon names. Satellite communications will be using constellation names. Electronic warfare will be using snake names. So that Meadowlands we talked about earlier will have a different slithery name that they'll take on. So a great ad for Guardian culture and normalizing the warfighting as a service and looking like the other services in terms of warfighting. From a real-world threats perspective, Chief Ron Lurch from Space Force S2 spoke publicly about Chinese and Russian advancements in low-observable satellite technology. So as we talk about space being a warfighting domain, here's another tangible example of the challenges and just what we're talking about space being a warfighting domain. You know, on one hand, it almost seems shocking that we're talking publicly about stealth satellites that the adversary is putting in space, but also have to realize all the data that he's using to talk about these capabilities came from commercial space domain awareness providers. So this also shows that convergence of the weaponization of space and the commercialization of space all happening at the same time. I'll also mention at the conference, they have the Space Force's Guardian Arena competition culmination and award ceremony. So this is a Space Force event, service-wide team competition. There's nothing like it in any service. They're combining problem solving, space knowledge, and physical strength. A lot of CrossFit type things going on as a team. There's no individuals winning awards. These are all team awards. So relatively new advancement. This is the third one for the Space Force, and it evolves each year. But again, another kind of exciting element of the evolving Guardian culture that we see coming out of the conference. And last, I want to give a congratulations to Hippie Wolf, the founder of SFA. It was announced there that he would be retiring after 6 years of standing up SFA and leading that. He's a big space power and Space Force advocate. We have a lot here in Mitchell Institute, but I want to congratulate him on what he's done for the Space Force and what he's done for Guardians through the Space Power Conference. And bid him a fond farewell.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, because, you know, we really need to have as many advocates for the Space Force as possible, especially, you know, still somewhat of a nascent service, but we've got to continue to invest in building the Space Force, given the demand and the reliance and frankly, the necessary and essential nature of what the Space Force provides, not only for the space domain, but for all of the military services within the DoD, and frankly, how we all live as Americans.
Yeah.
So thanks for that wrap up on Space Force Association. Let's do a round the table wrap up of 2025. What you think the biggest developments were. Sir, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, Heather, it's a good question. Obviously, going through a whole year in 60 seconds or less is tough, but I think the biggest changes that we saw in the Air Force was the transition from the previous administration to the new administration, and the associated changes when it came to a new Secretary of the Air Force, a new Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and just announced today a new Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General LaMontagne, at least as a nominee. And I think that with the new administration, you saw a significant change in many of the major reorganizational initiatives. Most of the considerable ones have been set aside, and the Air Force has come to the realization, well, not that it didn't have it, but it has fortunately become more vocal in terms of articulating the need to stop the decline in the size of the Air Force, both in terms of capacity, capability, and rebuild readiness, which was very evident in the Secretary of the Air Force's initial remarks when he came on board, describing his surprise at how poor a state Air Force readiness is in. And the new chief General Wilsbach also having readiness high on his priority list. So I think those are the top waves, and we'll see continued changes as a result of the refocus in the top leadership of the Air Force.
Laser, what you got for us?
The boss, you just stole everybody's points.
Nah.
You focus that a little bit more and just do, like, seriously, there's nothing left. It's supposed to be around the table.
Sorry.
Just go. Laser?
I took a little different look. I agree with, just sort of, I guess, in line with General Deptula, the refocus on warfighting. I know that warrior ethos, readiness, training, speed capability. That's something that we haven't seen in a while. Good or bad, the defense budget, we talked about it earlier, plus $8 billion. And then there's $150 billion in reconciliation. Not the best that we wanted, but it's better than nothing. Acquisition reform, again, just starting, but it's the first time I've seen the Pentagon, Congress, and industry all working together to try acquisition reform. And then the big thing in it, we're looking at the Ukraine war, you got artificial intelligence across commercial military operations, drones, we have surface, subsurface, air, drones, jamming, electronic warfare. What we're learning and seeing, and the development and proliferation of drones as well as counter-drone capability. You talked about Midnight Hammer, then you talked about Southern Spear. The other one, Refor Pack. I'm being a European guy during the Cold War, I'm always ready for Reforger going over there, but now Refor Pack, and then using Agile Combat Employment. That really started exercising the system. So, what I saw over the last year is a movement more toward increasing our warfighting capability.
Gonzo, what you got?
Yeah, I agree with Operation Midnight Hammer. That's a great example of why it's dead wrong to say stealth is dead. That includes some critics of stealth inside the Pentagon who tend to be in the budget and S&T committees, not the operational world. Stealth isn't dead. It's a prerequisite for air operations in contested environments. And the same goes for critics of fifth-generation F-35s, which penetrated Iranian airspace to suppress air defenses. Midnight Hammer is a reminder as well that our nation needs a larger bomber force that has the capacity to fly dozens of long-range penetrating strike sorties per day in a full-scale air campaign, because we do not have that force today. And finally, just to circle back to our national security strategy discussion, I think Midnight Hammer illustrates that this administration is serious about halting regional conflicts before they can spiral into broader wars.
Puma.
Laser talked about the focus on warfighting. I would just say that's been the Space Force story since day one. And if I was going to hit on anything, not exciting on the surface, but when you dig into it, in 2025, the United States had roughly 160 successful launches into space, 2,000 payloads put into orbit. China, 80 launches, around 300 satellites put in orbit. This is a 100 times increase over the early 2010s and a 10 times increase from just 5 years ago. So we project that 5 years from now and 10 years from now, we realize the capabilities that power our lives and our military are more and more moving to orbit. And those consequences are profound. So we're on the cusp of huge changes militarily. And so we're just seeing these things arrive and occur. And now in 2026, we're going to see them operationalize and become min viable products all the way up to FOC over the coming years. So just seeing that rapid advancement has been pretty incredible in 2025, focused on the warfighting side.
No, thank you. Doug, I know General Deptula stole your talking points. What do you got?
I think F-47 is so important from this year. You cannot be a stand-in penetrating air power force without that aircraft. And it was always designed as a family of systems between that and the B-21, and it was absolutely crucial that we preserved that.
Amen.
So I think that long-term is going to be absolutely foundational for the next chapter of air power.
Okay, JDM?
I think it's just like Gonzo was talking about, that it's not necessarily the event, but what the event says about what's going on in the world and what's important. So I'd point to the military parade back in September, marked the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, but having Xi Jinping hosting Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, three guys who really would like to carve up the world into spheres of influence. With all of that military hardware, we saw a whole bunch of things we're still looking at, still analyzing: intercontinental ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, drones, new classes of weapons. And I think we're probably going to see more of those reveals in 2026. On the space front, I think China or otherwise, one of the most dramatic stories for people who are watching was this November rescue of Chinese astronauts aboard the Tiangong space station. Their return capsule failed to operate properly. The Chinese did a quick turn and launched a mission with an uncrewed spacecraft that retrieved the stranded crew. You know, it might not have been life or death, but I think the fact that last year we were talking about how, you know, U.S. astronauts were having to stay on the International Space Station for several additional months over the holidays because we could not launch to get them back. And China was able to turn that around. And I think it just says volumes about sort of where China's space program is and where it's going. And if I got a second, 4 days ago, as of this recording, so I guess it was December 12th, I was reading an article. There was a near, let's not call it a near miss, a near hit between a recently launched Chinese satellite and a Starlink satellite. I think they came within 200 meters of each other. So space is getting more crowded. Just as Puma was saying, we're seeing more and more launches, more and more potential for conjunctions and space debris. So hopefully we won't see anything like that in 2026.
Okay, so lightning round. As we look for 2026, what are your predictions today? Where do you think we're going to stand when we're sitting here next December? Sir?
Modernize or lose. The Air Force's make or break year.
All right. Gonzo?
Unfortunately, I absolutely agree with you, but I think we're going to see a status quo defense budget.
Laser, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I think, well, we'll pass the 26 budget for defense. I think we're going to see essentially a flat budget, and those budgets, because it's an election year, we're not going to see anything get done till the end of the year.
Puma?
I think we hope to see on the proliferated architecture side, the transport layers we're building transition from experimental to warfighter usable. That's a hope, but I think we'll see it. And if we see it, that's becomes a game changer for joint kill chains.
Okay, excellent. JDAM?
Yeah, I think China's going to push the envelope this coming year. They're going to test the waters with this new national security strategy and maybe do something daring in and around Taiwan.
Doug?
We better buy capacity, and we better get the people that are required to operate the systems.
I got one more. You're going to see the most awesome Air Power Air Force flyby on July 4th, 2026.
So speaking of, we will begin releasing special editions midweek to celebrate America's 250th. These will be contributions by state in order of how they joined the Union regarding their unique air and space power contributions. So if you've got suggestions, send them in, but we hope you enjoy the short series. That's all we got for now. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see y'all later. Have a great aerospace power kind of day.
See you later, everyone.
Take care, all. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
And with that, I'd like to extend a big thank you to our guests for joining in today's conversation. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to you, our listeners, for your continued support and for tuning into today's show. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to hit that like button or follow or subscribe to the Aerospace Advantage. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you think about our show or areas that you would like us to explore further. As always, you can join in on the conversation by following the Mitchell Institute on X, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and you can always find us at mitchellaerospacepower.org. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great aerospace power kind of day. See you next time. And Slider, his car, you should have seen it. He has
Lights?
No, not lights. He has a snowman. He has a frosty snowman that's about 3 feet tall that is on the top of his car, and it's lit up like it's glowing, illuminated. Of course, his car is black. So as he's driving along, it looks like this floating, suspended Frosty the Snowman zipping along.
I love it.
It's awesome.
Yeah, somebody's got to take a picture.
After that, I was like, I am clearly an underachiever. And that was zero exaggeration. Normally, I'm like, I will exaggerate for the sake of the good story. That was 100% true.
No, so my wife one time unsupervised let me put all the lights out in front of the house. And that was the last time she let me do that unsupervised because I think aircraft were trying to land on the house.
Were you having a Griswold moment?
It looked good to me, so,
So apparently Slider was telling us that this all started out in Korea because, of course, many good things start out there. And it was a plastic reindeer that he duct taped to the top of his car. And it worked fine because, you don't drive any faster than 25 miles an hour on base. And so everything, the structural integrity was retained. But when he got back to the States and tried to do it, the inherent drag of the reindeer antlers caused some structural issues with the reindeer itself. And so that's why he had to move to a more aerodynamic Frosty the Snowman.
Santa deals with that. I hear.
Yeah. Okay, so the predictions things, you guys, you were like, that was advice. That was not predictions.
I didn't.
I made a
see
prediction.
I-
You made a prediction.
I followed the instructions.
Yeah.
I didn't see the instructions. I missed it. I didn't even. That was all off the top of my head. I didn't see any of that.
That's okay, sir. It was brilliant as always.
God, bless America.
All right.
I agree with you anyways, like I always do.
Well, they're supposed to be
Shane,
optimistic.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's all right.
I thought I had to ring her off.
No, I heard you, so I muted the mic. Sorry. So I did
Yeah. Cool.
Yes. Ukraine makes sense.
Oh!